Move to item number 2. Moved by Councillor Tom. You're going to move an option? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to move option 1.
Can I get a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Perry. Any comments or questions? Actually, Councillor Tom, go ahead. You moved it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank again the members of the Bridge Club who've made it out. I'm not sure if there's any other members of any other community groups that have made it out to look at this item or just to view this discussion of this item. I'm kind of at a loss for words with this report. I was under the impression that staff was going to be engaging with the community groups to, in a back and forth type of fashion where what are your needs, what are our available facilities, their costs, their square footage, their accessibility, etc., and look to accommodate the groups in that way. And instead we got a report back that says move forward with the demolition that we asked for or not on half the buildings until we can find an accommodation, and that second option, which is why I didn't move it, the delegate from the Bridge Club mentioned, doesn't even come close to accommodating their space requirements. So it's almost, it's not a viable solution even for the Bridge Club who are here tonight. I don't like when council gets this granular and, we're not the schedulers of the town facilities. So I don't know if ACC1's community hall has a accessible washroom is accessible, which I think it is, when it's rented and for how much. So, I was shocked to know that the delegate from the Bridge Club, at least in his delegation, was mentioned that he had not been provided with the bevy of town facilities, their rental costs, their square footage, and all the rest of it. I think that would have been nice to do because it saves us having to kind of debate it all now and have to go, to Al and ask him, okay, what night is the second Thursday in October free for the ACC community hall? Or so I guess my point is, I'll get to some questioning. I'll go through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Downey or Mr. Nadarozny, whoever can answer. The Bridge Club and their delegation made it clear that their scenario that they presented to staff was an ideal situation in terms of square footage and requirements for the continuation of the Bridge Club in Aurora, but they also mentioned that they would be willing to work with the town to look at what space we have available and see how we can move forward. So is it possible, Mr. Downey, that you could potentially engage in that process after we move forward with this item? I mean, I don't know if you have any comments on the specific needs of each group and whether or not we have availability at the community hall of ACC1 or, any of the various other facilities we have in town. It could take a while. I don't think we need to go into that much detail, but I think that's kind of where we are at this point. So unless you can guarantee that you'll work with all the groups to try and accommodate them as best as possible within the town moving forward, hopefully we don't have to adjudicate which rooms we're going to be using this evening.
Mr. Downey.
Through Mr. Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Perhaps I'll go a little bit through the process, and I did have a conversation with Mr. Smolak with regards to this. And I'll talk specifically about the Bridge Club, and then I can talk with some of the other groups if you wish. With regards to the Bridge Club, Mr. Smolak and I have been meeting on a yearly basis for the last decade. We have been in ongoing conversations, which is the reason they know that this building has been in question for a number of years. And during that, we'd usually meet over at Tim Hortons, and they would give me 12 checks for the year, and we would have a little update of where we are and a conversation about what's going on, and then move on. With the decision of council to demolish the building, I immediately set up a meeting with Mr. Smolak, once again, at Tim Hortons, and had a meeting with regards to what was being said in the paper. We then sent out a letter, as Councillor Abel has indicated, and had our first meeting with the Bridge Club on January 27th. at that meeting, and I explained to all the user groups with regards to Library Square that I was looking for their requirements. Their absolute needs with regards to making sure that we were addressing their organization, whatever that might be. I said to them, I can't read your mind with regards to what you need or what you can live with or whatever, but you need to tell us. And so the chart that you have within your report is a reflection of those conversations. Since that time, I've met with Mr. Smolnock at least on a monthly basis, going over options with regards to what we are looking at. In fact, at one point, we even had a meeting with the Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Smolnock, to discuss what options we were looking at. I had coordinated a meeting with the Seniors Association to look at an amalgamation of the group, and that was not successful. We did talk about the Aurora Community Centre, and part of the concern with regards to the community center is that it does have a seating limit below the number of people that are actually in the club right now, so it couldn't accommodate all the members it presently does in the Marjorie Andrews room. It doesn't have some of the amenities that they were looking for. The facility is technically accessible. However, you need to go into the center part of where the two rinks join to get into the elevator. It takes you into a hallway. Then you have to walk around the outside of ACC1 and enter into a door off of the hallway of ACC1 in order to enter in there from an accessibility perspective. Other than that, it's a set of stairs. Certainly, Mr. Smolnock said that that set of stairs was going to be problematic for some members, and so there was going to be a concern. One of the other concerns with regards to the community center auditorium was we were looking for space for our own town programs, which are also being displaced out of the old library. And so in the report, you see that we make reference to actually moving some of our programs into that space. So then we were going to be limiting the amount of time that was available to the Bridge Club. In addition to that, I had contacted the school board to see what the status of George Street Public School was and finding out whether or not we could actually enter into that particular facility. I did not share that with any of the groups. I went to the Salvation Army, the Northridge Church, spoke to them personally, and gave a card to Mr. Smolnock, and he contacted Northridge to find out whether or not space was available there, and unfortunately it was not. I then gave him a card for the brokers for the Hallmark building, so they could contact the brokers from the Hallmark building to possibly rent space within the Hallmark building, and as far as I know, those discussions are ongoing. I looked at relocating existing programs with our existing permit holders to see if there was an opportunity to move some space around so that perhaps we could look at accommodating this. But with the area requirements specific to the Bridge Club, which are in excess of 2,200 square feet, that's a difficult task. There is only one room other than perhaps the West Mackenzie room in the senior center that is large enough in order to accommodate that, and that's the auditorium. And as I said, that's not even large enough in order to accommodate their full 250 members. The other thing I looked at was other facilities that we could possibly look at that would accommodate them, such as the Petch House, because it's sitting there. Victoria Hall, what can we do with that? Like I say, we had some limited access with regards to that. One of the reasons that I looked at the recommendation with regards to the old senior center, originally a fire hall, as you know, was it wasn't an ideal situation. If you take a look, the Bridge Club is looking for commitment. They're looking for us to commit to a space on a long-term basis, and they would like it for at least 10 years. I mean, they didn't want a space that they moved in and 6 months later found that they needed to move someplace else. The idea of being able to move from one location on a Monday night to another location on a Wednesday night to a different location on a Friday night is not within the plan because of the amount of equipment that they have to set up in order to play bridge. there was a concern with regards to setup and takedown. They are aging members, and they did not want to set up and take down tables. They didn't think they had those capabilities to do on an ongoing basis. So we're looking for staff resources to do that, and we would then have to add additional staff resources in order to make that happen, and that was discussed with Mr. Smoldak as well. The old fire hall, or the old senior center, creates a space that is accessible, be it much smaller. But as you heard from Mr. Smolnak, their biggest crowd is on Friday afternoons, where they have pretty well their full membership in. Other than that, many of their games are smaller. So I think that space, and the reason I recommended that space was, first of all, it was extremely close to where they are right now, so it's a familiar spot. It is centrally located. It is accessible. They do have access to washrooms. They do have access to water. There are storage areas available, be it it's only 800 square feet, but it would accommodate a vast majority of the games, but not all of the games that they were looking at. One of the other concerns, however, is that council's also given us direction to tear that building down. So this is only a temporary solution, and that isn't one of those things that the Bridge Club was looking for. So those are some of the considerations and some of the discussions that have been going on since January, and one of the reasons it's taken us this long to get a report before council. This is not unusual with regards to negotiations, and this is also very similar to the discussions I've had with all the other user groups that are also using the facility. So I've had similar conversations with the Air Cadets, similar conversations with Faith Fellowship Church, similar conversations with the private rentals that we have within the facility, similar conversations with the Lions Club, who have an outstanding notice of motion to be accommodated somewhere within Library Square. So we've had a number of conversations and looked at a number of options. This isn't something that is easy to do. I don't argue that. But if we had surplus space, I think that we would do our very best to accommodate. Our concern is surplus space doesn't exist.
Thank you, Mr. Downey. Councillor Tom, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Mr. Downey. It seems like there's perhaps a bit of discrepancy between the accounts. We had, a lot of conversations, and not a lot of conversations, but it seemed like a lot of conversations were had, and yet we haven't gotten any closer to finding a place where people can play bridge. I mean, from my perspective, I'm not on the ground. I don't know which rooms, how big they are, and like I said before, but it just seems like, come on, like this should be something we could figure out. You mentioned, Mr. Downey, that the ACC one is accessible. There is an elevator there. You do have to walk down a bit of a hallway, but it is accessible. There's washrooms on the second floor and near the auditorium, I believe. There's a kitchen. It's the largest space other than the West Mackenzie room. So, I know it's not the ideal scenario that the Bridge Club had envisioned, because staff had asked them for their ideal scenario, but I think what we've heard here is that the Bridge Club wants to play bridge. They want to play bridge in Aurora, and they want to do it with accessibility, with enough space to house at least as many of their members as they can, and to have some town amenities. So all I can say is I'm in favor of option one, because I think that was the mandate we gave staff and when we wanted to move forward with Library Square. But we just need staff to be able to figure this out. And, I don't know how busy is ACC1's auditorium? I don't know. It can't be 24 hours booked. Friday afternoons is booked at that auditorium. That auditorium's always empty. So I don't know these things. My only comment is I just really like staff to figure this out and accommodate one of these, the groups that have come here tonight and other groups that we're displacing by the demolition of those two buildings. And I'll leave it there, because I'm sure everyone else has something to say.
Thank you, Councillor Tom. Councillor Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wasn't going to ask this one, but given that Councillor Tom asked the question and didn't ask for the response, so through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Downey, can you respond to Councillor Tom's question regarding ACC 1? And so is that available if the Bridge Club desires it?
Mr. Downey?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes and no. I apologize for that answer, but if the Bridge Club wanted that particular facility, we would then have to determine whether or not we would then going to go off and assign additional staff to set tables up and take tables down, because that is their request. We would have to determine how long you would like this to carry on for, because they're looking for a long-term relationship, and we haven't got any indication that we're looking at building any community space that's specific to their needs. So that is a concern. We do have other programs within that particular facility. As I said, we are going to be moving some of our programs there, so we wouldn't do that now. And so we would cancel those programs in order to accommodate the needs of the Bridge Club. I don't mean to give you issues. I don't mean to give you problems. But the concern is, if we had surplus space available, we would certainly do that. But we are in desperate need of additional space. One of the concerns is, with regards to access to that room, is when a Tigers game is going on, they would not have access to that room. So they wouldn't be able to provide access in there. We don't have storage facilities within that room, but we could build additional storage facilities in order to accommodate their needs. So it would take some modifications to the room as well. But there also may be some cancellations with regards to that, in lieu of some other programs that might be taking place in the auditorium.
Thank you, Mr. Downey. Councillor Kim?
And Mr. Downey, one of the big corporate residents that we have is Magna. Have you considered inquiring space from them? They've been great community neighbors in the past.
Mr. Downey?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair, I apologize. With regards to space allocation, I've given you some of the steps that I've taken, and as you can appreciate, I'm at council's wish. If you want me to become a real estate agent or a broker for space for the user groups, I'm more than happy to do that. But I felt that I've taken some steps on space that I'm aware of, and I haven't gone off and then researched additional spaces that might be able to satisfy their needs and then put them in contact with that. If Magna's available, the Bridge Club can contact Magna. But if it's council's desire that I go off and start contacting other non-municipal facilities in order to accommodate the needs of the Bridge Club or any of the other user groups, I'm happy to do that under the direction of council, but it isn't something that I felt that you necessarily wanted from me.
Councillor Kim?
Mr. Downey, and you're absolutely correct. I mean, you're not a real estate broker. You probably wouldn't be a good one anyway. And just kidding. No, and with respect to your time, I know that our senior staff are under a crunch because we are without one senior member of the leadership team. So there are a lot of directors that have duplicate roles. So I'm empathetic about that. So we do know a couple of contacts with Magna. So if you could share those contacts with Mr. Smolnak. Sorry, Mr. Smolnak. That would be great. And you know, it's given that our town inventory is challenged, and we know that there are restrictions, and I think all we can do is provide the Bridge Club with the best options that we have. And I'm not sure. I know it's been verbalized. Maybe they need something in writing in terms of. I'm not convinced that from hearing Mr. Smolnak and Mr. Downey that there's been a final kind of here are the best options to present so that they can consider as a membership. You know, my last question would be, you know, in our last December 5th special council regarding cultural precinct workshop, item number 4 was that council authorized staff to proceed with an application of the demolition of 52 and 56 Victoria Street pending the relocation of tenants. So we were not going to go forward with demolition or any plans until the tenants were relocated. So this is superseding that, and I'd like to ask Mr. Downey, through you, Mr. Chair, what's changed since December? Mind you, it's been 6 months now. What's changed during that time that is giving you an ultimatum in terms of the timeline?
Councillor Kim, I'll direct that question to our CAO.
Okay.
Sorry, excuse me.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't think anything is superseded. We won't proceed with demolition until we have tenants out of the building. And so this report is just the next step in that process. The timelines that were given to us suggested that by June or July we would be proceeding down a path for demolition, and clearly we can't do that while we have tenants in the building. So we're just bringing this to another update to council in terms of where we sit with that process. So nothing has changed from the direction we've received.
Councillor Kim?
Thank you, Mr. Nadarosny. But through you, Mr. Chair, the clause pending the relocation of tenants, that hasn't been satisfied, and that's been removed from this directive. Can you comment on that?
Mr. CAO?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is what we're attempting to achieve with this report, is the relocation of the tenants so that we can proceed with the demolition.
Councillor Kim?
Okay, because if we choose option 1, there's no mention that the condition is that on condition that the tenants are relocated. You're saying that that's implied, but it's not specified in the clause?
Councillor Kim, maybe I can shed some light too. So we actually had a motion not too long ago where we put out for an RFP for the demolition, and it was approved unanimously by this council to go forward with an RFP for demolition of those 2 buildings. And so I think that's what the change was. It's the way I see it, and I'm sure that's the way Mr. Downey and the rest of the staff were directed from this council, I believe. Maybe Mr. CAO could elaborate on that, or if I'm wrong in that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, I don't think you're wrong in that at all. I think that we're sort of in a circular discussion here. I mean, we're not going to proceed with the demolition of a building while there's tenants in it. We've been asked to relocate the tenants and to get ready for demolition, and we're making our best effort to find spaces to accommodate not only our own programs, but those other tenants that have been in the building. And so we're at an impasse because we don't have municipal space. This isn't the case of allocating existing municipal space and trying to find the right configuration and having a bunch of people trying to get the same space. We physically don't have municipal space. We're never given direction to spend money to make capital improvements to buildings, to accommodate other tenants, things like that. So if that's the direction council wants to do at this juncture, given the work that we've done and the lack of success we've had in some areas, then we would take that direction. But basically, we're at an impasse as well as staff because we have nowhere else to go with proceeding with demolition until we come to some resolution on the tenants.
Councillor Kim?
No, I get that, but it's still, that clause is removed, stating that, essentially we're moving forward because previous council, we did move forward with the demolition and to go with the RFP. There was no stated date on when that actual demolition was going to take place. And so chronologically, it didn't really impede the December motion pending the relocation. And I totally understand that, we're not necessarily, this is not an official town program, but it's just a goodwill gesture in that this is impacting quite a few, 250 residents is quite a bit. So I'm going to ask this question then. So through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Nadarosny, when is the ideal time? I know for construction there's certain seasons that are more amenable to others. So for demolition, what season is the best with respect to cost effectiveness in terms of the RFP getting out, the actual demo happening? When's the actual, what season is best?
I'll direct that to Mr. Downey.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there's no preferred time. It could be done at any time. We're just trying to simply move forward. We feel as the direction of council now that you've asked us to put in an RFP and you've actually allocated funds for a demolition. We'd like to be able to at least start moving forward with that. But there is no preferred time for a demolition.
Councillor Kim?
Okay, great. So if there's no preferred time, October 1st is really 3 months away. I would like to amend this to at least say November 30th. It gives an extra 2 months for the members to make a more concerted effort to find at least a temporary home, and maybe during that time, Mr. Downey can provide, just 3 or 4 options, even if it's not realistic options, at least some options that they can consider
Do I have
their
a
membership.
Sorry, do I have a seconder to that amendment?
Because it doesn't seem like the demo is going to happen right on October 1st or October 30th, so why not? I'm not even sure if it's going to happen this year, so why not extend it November 30th? But if I'm not going to have a second, there's no point belaboring that.
Would you like an answer to that question, Mr. Downey?
Sure.
Mr. Downey? Will the demo, if this report, I guess the question from Councilor Kim is if the report goes, if this gets passed, would the demolition occur October 1st? Or just slightly after?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd slightly after. It's the timing that I would put together. So with this report, if this report got approved, that way then I could put that actually right into the RFP, that demolition needs to take place sometime after October 1st, and we could pick a date. But what our preferred date would be, and that way I could clearly communicate to council and to the public when there would be an expectation of those buildings coming, of that building coming down. The option, however, with option 1, it would also cause the removal of 52 or 56, 52 Victoria, and we have the air cadets in there that we haven't had a discussion with regards to this evening, and they have similar space requirements to the Bridge Club. In fact, they need totally dedicated space.
Thank you, Mr. Downey. Councilor Kim?
Yeah, so, this demo, and I do understand the implications of the demo and what it symbolizes, and I agree with that. So long as the RFP states a date that we're going to go ahead with the demolition, I think it satisfies what we're trying to achieve in bringing the cultural precinct plan forward. And so I'm just asking that that date just be moved by a couple of months, just to give more time. I don't see anything wrong with that because there's no existing plan to replace that. So if no one's going to second it, there's no point for me continuing it.
Thank you, Councilor Kim. Councilor Perry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reason I didn't second that motion is I don't think this is going to be that big of a deal. I think that we will be able to find a solution before the October 1st deadline. Through you to Mr. Downey, Mr. Chair. Now, there's been a change of position from the Aurora Bridge Club's position. Initially, they needed a space that was something that was left up. They've now agreed that they'd be willing to look at options where they have to set up and take down. So through you to Mr. Downey, are there other options for them now that are available that weren't necessarily open to them before?
Mr. Downey?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it sounds like 800 square feet's not enough, so they'd be looking for at least 1,000 or probably closer to 1,500. That leaves very few rooms other than, once again, the ACC. So I would be looking at the auditorium and finding out what I could do as far as accommodating them within the auditorium, and determining what impact that might have with regards to them being taking over the auditorium. As you know, we have a capital budget item right now for renovations of that space, so we wouldn't be renovating that space anymore. Even though we have approval to move forward with that. So I would cancel that RFP and not move forward with it. So there are some implications with regards to how we are dealing with, how we deal with it. But the ACC seems to be the only space that provides an answer within a municipal facility. I'm continuing to try to find where I can put them outside of a municipal facility, but I'm not very successful. This does raise the concern, however, and I don't want to make light of it. We haven't addressed the air cadets, and they're going to need similar area dedicated.
And
And
Mr. Downey, I appreciate that, but we'll stick to the report. I'll hold you to the same rules as council. So, Councillor Perry?
So,
The architects is in the report?
but I think my question was answered within the first sentence of Mr. Downey's response. So, I do think that there are other options that aren't necessarily covered in this. I agree that 800 square feet isn't ideal. If we move to, option B, I would be amenable to that in the short term. But again, the issue around the table is that we don't have enough space. We all acknowledge that we don't have enough space. That's why we're going through this process of building Library Square. It's because we don't. And maybe in my view, the days of having a space that is open, where they don't have to take down, set up, moving forward in perpetuity is gone. But I do think there's a great opportunity to continue to partner and to build something in the long term, which is what they're looking for. But we do need to move forward. I think the York Region Police might be an option, but again, all of these are things that I think staff are able to find answers to. I don't think that we need to find all of the answers here tonight. Mr. Downey is well aware of our conversations. And I think one of the other issues that wasn't necessarily spoken about to a large extent was the ability, from what we're hearing as well, there is really only one really big night, and that's the Friday afternoon. Everything else, they're a little bit smaller. So really, from my perspective, we're looking to accommodate the larger group 1 day a week. And if they have to go to a different space for all the different, for all the other sessions, but for the one session, I think it's not ideal, but we're not talking about a long-term 10-year position here. We're talking about what can we do in the interim to make sure that, once we do have something new built, there's space for them. And I think all of us around the table would agree that the Bridge Club is a vital part of our community, and we need to make sure that they are accommodated in the long term. But really, we're talking about undertaking works on these sites in the short term. And so from my perspective, any accommodations that we need to be made need to be done in the short term, and it won't be the most comfortable situation, but we've seen through other groups in the community that it gets done. So I have full faith in Mr. Downey's ability to get this done. I understand that we're putting him under some pressure. I think if Mr. Downey wanted to be a real estate broker, like everything else that he's done to date, if he sets his mind to it, he'll do a good job. So I have full faith in Mr. Downey's ability to get this done. And I understand that there are some stresses, but I have faith. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Gardner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When it came to voting on the demolition of the buildings, I tried to vote against it, but I got a little confused in my voting, so I'm not sure it showed on the record. So I can't see a solution here, and I really don't know if it's fair to ask Mr. Downey. I mean, Mr. Downey can try, but he does have a full-time job, and we need him to do the full-time job. So if he can make a few phone calls, perhaps he could do that, but we're putting a lot on him, and I think it's kind of an impossible situation. Saying that, through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Downey, you mentioned the Petch House. How large is the Petch House?
Mr. Downey?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's even smaller. It's only about 500 square feet, so it's even worse than the other. That's why, like I say, I mention it only so I can write it off the list. Okay, I looked at it. No, it doesn't work. I move on. It hasn't got hydro. It hasn't got water. It hasn't got a lot of different things. It's not accessible either. So,
Thank you, Mr. Downey. Councillor Gardner?
I know that. I was going to ask you how much that would cost, but not for 500 square feet. We do have some rooms in the town hall. We have the counselor's lounge that is never used anymore. It's just become a storage space. I don't know if Mr. Downey knows how big that is. We also have the lunchroom upstairs, which is a beautiful space, and the other part of that room, which we use for the art exhibit. I'm sure that's not used on Sundays, and maybe it doesn't have to be used Friday afternoon after the lunch hour. So I'd like to have Mr. Downey's comments on those two options.
Mr. Downey?
Mr. Chair, those are all smaller than 800 square feet, so it's even worse than we have that I'm proposing at the old senior center. So there is a concern with regards to access and when they want to play. So town hall would now have to be accessed more often, additional staff, those types of things. So I could give those some consideration, but if they can't play in 800 square feet, I don't know how they would be able to do that in the cafeteria, which is less than 800 square feet.
Councillor Gardner?
Follow up, the cafeteria and that space that's the Skylight Gallery, those spaces combined must be pretty close to that.
Mr. Downey?
Yes, that would be a larger space. If council would like me to consider that, I'm more than happy to do so. I can give you some limitations with regards to that.
Councillor Gardner?
They would have to change their Friday open game. It's at 12:45 now. It would have to be after our staff used it during their lunch hour, but it's a possibility. With respect to the private group on page 3, they need to be on the transit line. What is Victoria Hall, through you, Mr. Chair, is Victoria Hall large enough for that?
Mr. Downey?
I'm sorry, for the private rental?
The private group.
Yeah, the Victoria Hall is not large enough for them, but it may have to do, and it's not ideal for them because they usually get into some breakout areas, but it is something that we can certainly consider. The issue with that is they need it exactly the same night as we have the Scottish dancers in there. So now do I remove them in order to accommodate that group? So that's one of the concerns with Victoria Hall, is that it would then mean a relocation for the Scottish dancers if they could be moved to another night, and I'm not aware whether they can. I haven't approached them with regards to that. So that's part of that issue. One of the areas that I haven't looked at is the cultural center. So if Brevik Hall is available, in council's mind, I'm more than happy to look at Brevik Hall, but that would limit the amount of activities that the cultural center could have within the cultural center. But that may be amenable to council. I'm not sure.
Thank you, Mr. Downey. Councillor Gardner?
Well, that would also have to be a discussion with the cultural center and what they have booked, because I think they book out quite far in advance. So the Faith Fellowship Baptist Church might be able, you said that they could maybe move to the senior center, because they could also move up to that room on a Sunday for the town hall, at the town hall.
Mr. Downey?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, in my report I identified that the Mackenzie West room, as well as the 2 priestly rooms and the kitchen, would be available, and that would satisfy their needs. The concern with that, and I have contacted them, but they haven't got back to me, is that the rent triples. So that may be problematic for them, and I'm not aware of that. As they say, they haven't communicated back to me whether or not that's a concern. And if it is, then there may need to be some consideration given by council to subsidize their use of that particular facility.
Councillor Gardner?
And I don't know if council subsidizes the use of faith groups to use our building. That would be maybe a policy change or a new policy. It's something we'd have to look at. With respect to the Canadian Children's Theatre, we just don't have anything 4,000 to 6,000 feet. So that's on page 5. So it goes back to the same issue. And lastly, on page 4 and 5, with respect to the Town of Aurora community programs and the summer camps, that maybe speaks to a service level that the Town of Aurora provides. So, and we use the space, we could use the space at ACC 1 for those programs. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Downey.
Mr. Downey?
To you, Mr. Chair, that's correct, and that's one of the issues that I'll be happy to bring forward to Council as to whether there's a conflict between the programs that we would be operating the facility and whether that would have a conflict with the Bridge Club, and that Council may have to venture into a decision as to whether we support the programs of the Bridge Club or the programs of the town for the use of that space, because we are limited to what we can do for our programs as well in the space that we can use.
Thank you, Mr. Downey. Councillor Gardner?
I don't know if it's the right word, conundrum. Is that the right word? I don't know what the answer is unless we can find some vacant industrial space that would be willing to be used. I know that the south part of town has a lot of vacant space, so I don't know if there's something there that we could find. Mr. Downey, maybe you could take a drive around and then go to Tim Hortons.
Is that a question, Councillor Gardner? Or a statement? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Councillor Abel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, the obvious space is the Armory, and it's right there in the town park. It's town-owned. But just for clarification, it's public knowledge May 23rd that in closed session the town was discussing a letter of intent at 89 Moseley. And 89 Moseley is the Armory, and a letter of intent is a document containing a declaration of intentions of the writer. And furthermore, a document outlining one or more agreements between two or more parties before the agreements are finalized. So that's why we're not talking about the Armory. It's town-owned. We have a need for it. Why we're talking about this in closed session when we have an obvious demand for that space is beyond me. It's perfect. It's perfect for the cadets. It's perfect for the Bridge Club. It's perfect for our community. When we do plan things, we think long range, and we've known for a long time we need programmable space. It's a fact. Known it since I started on council 6 years ago. We do not have enough facilities. We shouldn't be moving our town-owned facilities and entering agreements when we need that space. It's got to be declared surplus. It should be an expression of interest.
Point of order.
Mayor Dock, point of order.
Question through you to the solicitor. I think that we're straying outside closed session confidentiality. You mentioned closed session.
I'll direct it to Mr. Sario just to hear what she has to say. Mr. Sario, or is this conversation straying into?
It may get there. I just would suggest you discuss only what you can discuss, and just a reminder that anything that happened in closed session cannot be discussed. What do you want me to say?
I will, Councillor, I will allow you to continue, but if we stray into those conversations, then I will have to ask you to stop with the conversations on the Armory.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I hope my time wasn't taken up on that brief point. I'm just reading what is on our agenda. It says, closed session, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the town or local board, Section 239 of the Municipal Act. Closed session report, letter of intent, 89 Mosley. That's all. That's public knowledge. Also, on December 5th, when we decided we were going to do the demolition and give notice, we also asked, Council approved a motion to preserve the main features of the town park and have staff report back on specific enhancements to town park for consideration by Council. In regards to the armory, staff was directed to report back on estimates for repurposing of the armory and to initiate a design exercise. So, since December 5th, just to give you some idea, we did come back to Council and we did say we wanted to do a library square design. We hired Fotan, it came back to us, and we've decided not to go ahead with the Fotan concept, but we are going to go ahead with the demolition. So, it's poor planning on the part of our town that we are in this conundrum. We really could have been repurposing the armory knowing that we're going to displace the tenants and then let's put in some more programmable space in the library square so that we can move you back into that. It's no different than providing soccer fields. It's no different than providing senior center and all the other facilities that we have, providing for our community. And as a councillor, that's what I feel our role is to provide for our community. So we know we need programming space, and this programming space we've seen with all the tenants is extremely important. To do the demolition, you should have a design and funding all approved and in place. To demolish it, just for the sake of demolishing it, and then go through the process, it could be months, it could be years before we get the final design and we get the final funding all in order. It would make more sense to put the design and the funding in place and then say, now is the time we're going to do the demolition. But we're not doing that. We're not doing anything right, and we haven't done it from the very beginning. We should be thinking long-term and planning ahead. We've known for as long as I've been on council and beforehand that we're going to do something with that library square. We have identified that we are short facilities. We should have been thinking of how we're going to accommodate long-term facilities, what we're going to do in between, and we shouldn't be doing anything until we have a surplus with our facilities for our community. That armory has been identified in report after report as something we can use for our community. We did repurposing studies. We know that we can find a use for that armory. And right now is a perfect example. We also know that we don't have to do the demolition until we have a design and we have funding all approved. Then we do the demolition. We haven't even started that process. We haven't even put out an RFP. So why we're doing this to our community is beyond me. I can't support anything unless we put things in place. And to put this in perspective, it'd be like tearing down an arena and telling the kids you can't play hockey anymore, and we don't know if we're ever going to build one again, and go somewhere else. So I want you to all know that I'm not in favor of any of this, the way this process has gone. We can do a much better job in going ahead with the library square and finding programmable space that we have facilities for it. And we shouldn't be doing anything until we look after our community. So those are just my thoughts on round one.
Thank you, Councillor Abel. Yeah. Councillor Thompson?
I think, Councillor Gardner, you're right. It is a conundrum. And certainly, from my perspective, we had a conversation earlier about the date and whether the date's October 1st or November 30th. I mean, it's 100 days or 160 days, and if there's a solution to be found, it will be found within those 100 days. It's my belief. If council moves forward with this motion, my expectation would be that staff and council would continue to work with the various groups to find solutions that that we can present. They may not be ideal, but I would hope that staff would present to all the groups at least an option, whatever that best possible option would be for each individual group to keep moving forward. We can understand the challenges that each group possess, but I know conversations that I've had, as well as other members of council, reaching out to other community members about a space that they may have that is non-municipal, see if those are alternatives. I would hope that if any of those opportunities present themselves, that they would be presented to the groups as well as options to consider. And my expectation is that between now and October 1st, that somehow it will get figured out. But I don't know if it will be ideal, but there will be some options available for sure. You know, I think we've all expressed the part of this issue reinforces the fact that we are challenged. The town continues to grow. We don't have enough public community space. We don't have enough sports facility. And so we continue to look this term to address all of those needs. And part of the driver on Library Square has been the fact that there is a plan. There is a plan to build a facility adjacent to the Church Street School to accommodate more public space. I think I've yet to hear anybody around this table say that they don't agree with that concept. We may not all agree with what the final look of Library Square will be, but I think everybody is on the same page that we need to replace those aging facilities with something new. I mean, that's one of the drivers that we've done. We've talked over and over about the fact that when Mr. Downey presented us with a repurposing study, that there was millions of dollars necessary for the renovation of the Armory, the old senior center, the old library, and we as a group made a choice to move forward with the demolition of those facilities because we didn't want to put more money into them, that we wanted to build and create something new within that space. So I understand the challenges, but you know, perhaps through you to Mr. Nadarozny. Mr. Nadarozny, would an amendment be necessary to continue the efforts to try and, or at least let's say continue our best efforts to try and assist those groups as a relocation? I think back to the letter you sent in February, which really, granted it said may or may not be able to assist, but it did say that we would do our best to try and help with any relocation. So in your perspective, do you see staff and still trying to assist them between now and October 1st, should this motion pass?
Mr. CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly we would attempt to assist, but I would also want to be realistic. As Mr. Downey has outlined, we've gone through considerable effort, talked about accommodating groups that aren't even on the radar to try and free up space, to make
Mr. CAO,
space.
Can I stop you for a minute? I need a motion to extend. Moved by Councillor Perry, seconded by Councillor Collin. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Sorry, Mr. CAO. Continue.
Certainly. So we have gone through a fairly exhaustive effort to try to utilize the space that we have some control over. So quite frankly, without the injection of some new thing, we're going to be in the same place in 60 days unless the demands change, the needs change from the user groups, or we bring some more resources to the table. If this council would like us to go out in the market and find space and rent it, and then give it away or sublet it at a price less than we're paying for it, then a whole world of opportunities become possible. But I don't want to mislead this council into thinking that with another 60 days and some creative thinking, we are going to solve an 8,000 square foot space problem with no additional space or resources. It's just not going to happen.
Councillor Thompson.
And I understand that, and from my perspective, you know, we've talked about the ACC auditorium, and maybe, you know, that option is presented to some of the groups and say, you know, it's not the ideal scenario for you, but, you know, here's what we can offer you. No different than, I know you mentioned it in the report in terms of an alternative about exploring non-municipal space. Well, maybe that does come back to this council and says, you know, is there appetite for that or not? You know, that's not part of the conversation tonight. But, you know, maybe that is a short-term temporary solution while we work through this process. You know, I think that I'd like to be able to say to all the groups at the end of this process that we made every attempt to try and help find them a solution.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Humphreys.
Thank you to you, Mr. Chair, and I was going to ask if we could add, on this motion on the table, that we continue to work to find space for the community groups. And I don't want to just restrict to town facilities. I know that when we don't have programming spaces, we go out and make, negotiations with schools or facilities when we're running out. You're right, the town is growing. We have lots of programs going on, and we're trying to accommodate the need. There's a great need here. I learned a lot tonight about the Bridge Club that I was not aware of, just how much how high the membership is and how successful it is. So if there's anything further we can do, I would like that. Maybe there was some thought process around not necessarily having the same site. It looks like Friday's the big day, and maybe there's accommodation in another site for the other days. That can work. And if it happens to be in one of our arenas or facilities, we do have people there that are working from an operations perspective, keeping things running, and I'm sure they could help with tear down, and set up. So it's just an option. I know that we've done a lot. I'm not sure if we've exhausted every corner, but maybe there's some more work that can be done, and wondering if there could be a working session with staff and the president of the club, of the Bridge Club, just to really continue to work together. So I don't know if that's a motion we can add.
Are you making an amendment?
I'd like to. I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but that staff continue to work, looking for space.
So the amendment is the staff continue to
work with
working
community groups,
into
yeah.
looking for additional space or for temporary
accommodate.
to accommodate the displaced groups. Seconded by Councillor Perry. Comments or questions on the amendment? Councillor Thompson, then Councillor Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So are they going to look outside of what the town facilities? Is that what, because we already know that if they go outside, it drastically changes. And there was also, I think, an astute observation that if we're going to look outside the town facilities, it's going to cost more money. And therefore, our obligation is to supplement that. That's not part of the motion, because if that's not part of it, then all they're going to do is look at facilities that we have, and we've already done that. I mean, we've gone right around this table. We're going to go in the lunchroom upstairs. So I think, in all respect, unless we're looking for a benevolent property owner that will accommodate 8,000 square feet at a subsidized rate, I don't know. I think it's noble, but I don't think it's going to, I don't think we're going to have anything of fruition, whatever that time is. I really think, I don't know that I can support the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Abel. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. I'm fine with the amendment, but, I want to take our CAO's comments, in consideration, that we're going to make best efforts. We're going to try and be able to, explore all options, but at the end of the day, we're all hopeful, but, at the end of the day, there's no guarantee.
Any other questions to the amendment? I'll call a question on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? The amendment carries. Back to the main motion as amended. And we had Mayor Daw on the list.
I almost forget where we are. It's a little disconcerting, Mr. Chair, that very few members of council, or not all members of council, are discussing the fact that there's 8 groups in this report, not one. And I get requests from other groups all the time for space. So I think we need to be cognizant that there's a number of people who are looking for space. So if the town has an obligation, we've got an obligation to all of them. That includes Rotary and Optimus and the Lions. Their Lions are mentioned in here. So I don't believe that the town has an obligation or a responsibility to find space or subsidize programs that are not town related. We have an obligation to help And if we can do that, that's great. Mr. Downey has attempted to help with the Bridge Club. I've made some calls myself. I unfortunately have not made contact with people I need to talk to, but I will continue to do that. But we made a unanimous decision to demolish the building, the old library. Unanimous means everybody. So we made the decision knowingly. We made a decision that is unfortunate for a certain number of our residents and other people who come into town, but we made that decision because we feel it's in the best interest of the town as a whole, and that is our obligation. Our overall obligation is to the town as a whole. Our job isn't easy. All the decisions are not necessarily easy or popular, but that's why we are here. So I have no problems. I supported the amendment to continue looking because that's what we should do. But I think we need to remember that we're here to provide equality, and we've discussed this in many different issues. Although I did have a quick question. I don't know if Mr. Downey knows this. The size of the armory, I don't know that. If Mr. Downey...
Mr. Downey?
Through you, Mr. Chair, 8,000 square feet.
Thank you, Mr. Downey. Mayor Daw?
I appreciate Mr. Downey. I was going to ask for Mr. Downey's perspective on all this, so I do appreciate his comment. And we have. I'm not sure. I mean, if it's up to us to go out to groups or to other areas. I mean, we gave them information. We gave the Bridge Club information on the Hallmark building. So where does our obligation lie? Where does our obligation stop? I think we need to have that discussion as a council. So I support the report that's on the floor. I have no problem with the option that Councillor Tom picked. I think we made the decision to move ahead, as I said. I think we need to stick to that.
Thank you, Mayor Daw. Councillor Abel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm totally, I can't agree with anything, or some of the things that the mayor has said. I think our obligation is to our community. I think we can agree on that. I don't think demolishing the old library without accommodating the users is appropriate. I think it's our obligation to plan, and I don't know why we can't use the armory. It's just natural that we would be using the armory. It's perfect. We have no...
Point of order? Wait 1 second, Councillor Thompson.
Councillor Abel knows full well why we can't use the armory. He is not being honest. He was in closed session. He voted for it. He knows full well. He knows full well what is happening with the armory.
Question of privilege.
I think he wants to rephrase that I'm not being honest. I take exception to that comment. I'm merely stating a fact.
Well, Councillor Abel, I'm actually going to vote in favor of Councillor Thompson's point of order due to the fact that it is knowledge of every councillor sitting here at this table of the discussions in closed session. And I agree with Councillor Thompson that you are fully aware of those discussions and the direction that was presented to staff, and it's misleading to the public to state otherwise. And so I will vote in favor of Councillor Thompson's point of order. You may continue, Councillor Abel.
What about my question of privilege, him saying I'm not being honest?
I voted in favor of the point of order, basically agreeing that you weren't being honest to the public. You can challenge the chair if you'd like.
I don't think I'm going to bother challenging the chair. The problem is what I'm saying is we have a facility, the armory. That's truthful. We own that. We are in control of it. We are now discussing in closed session a letter of intent. And in my opinion, that's a shame. I don't think we should demolish anything until we have the design in place. When we have that in place, then we set upon the demolition. That will bide months, if not years, for our tenants. And in that time, we should also find ways to accommodate. So I think we should go and buy another facility or build one for the one that we could be using, that we own and we have control of. We really have no business doing that. And that's being honest. I'd like to put an amendment on the floor that no demolition take place until a design and funding has been approved.
Councillor Abel, that would be a reconsideration.
It's not a reconsideration, it's a timeline.
No, the council has already made a decision to demolish the buildings and an RFP to be submitted. So therefore, any consideration to not demolish the building at this time would need a reconsideration by this council.
So if we can be honest, that building's coming down, whether you have a spot or not. Whether we found accommodation or not, that building's coming down. And I will not be in favor of that. That's a shame. We should be looking after our community. Let's bring the community back into the focus of this council.
Thank you, Councillor Abel. Before I move on, I just had a few comments. It is a shame, actually, that councils of the past didn't make this decision, because we wouldn't be here today. And this is part of the reason is no one's been able to make a decision to say, hey, let's stand up, we need to move forward. And when we're looking at doing for what's best for our community, I agree with the mayor. The best interest of this community is to develop and build more community space. That is part of the process that we've been doing with this library square. We've developed a concept. We've found components. We've discussed this at length. We have 15 years of studies. We've talked to every community partner. We've talked to all the committees. We've talked to residents, had open houses. And the common theme has come back that we need more community space. We'd like to see a civic square. And that's what this council's doing. And the decision is the best way to get that extra community space is to demolish those two buildings. And so that's what this council has decided as a group to move forward with. And we said, let's find that temporary space for the tenants of those two buildings. And that's what we're trying to do. And it is a struggle. And that's what has become evident to all of us here, is that we don't have that community space. And that's why there's a need to build more community space. Councillor Abel was correct in the one statement that he makes, that we need to build more community space. That's what we're trying to do. And it's unfortunate that some people will be displaced, but when we're going to look for that temporary space, but that's the thing, is it will be temporary space, whatever we do find. And we can look at relocating you back into a more permanent space once we do develop and build that extra community space. So I'll just stop there at this point, and I'll move to Councillor Tom, and then maybe I might have a little bit more to add at the end of this. But Councillor Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, some of the language we're getting into discussions here is quite unfortunate. It's been pointed out a number of times, but let me just reiterate. On December the 5th, at the special council meeting, I believe there was a motion that I think I supported at the time. I know Councillor Abel certainly has, based on his comments tonight, that we wait until we have a plan in place, design in place, before we move forward with demolition of the properties. That was not approved by that special council, and instead what was approved, I will say, by all council members, including Councillor Abel. Whether he's at a change of heart now is fine, but he definitely supported it on the 5th of December, which was, after that failed, we move forward with what's currently on the books, which is to move forward with the demolition. So perhaps he's had a change of heart. That happens. It's totally fine, but let's just be clear about what happened and what hasn't happened. And again, it's unfortunate we get into these discussions, but I just think that the record has to be stated if it's being trotted out as rationale. These buildings operate annually at a loss of almost 50 grand. They require significant infrastructure upgrades. I don't know if the infrastructure upgrades are included in the report, but they require new HVAC. There's a litany of items that are required to maintain, just to bring them up to standard. of the town. And so, you know, that has to play a factor as well. It did when we talked about the demolition back in December, and I think it does now. I think we all want a solution that the Bridge Club can continue to play bridge in Aurora and do the great things that they do. I think that's totally possible. I know that we've had just challenges with space that the staff, town staff have outlined. We have till October to try and accommodate the group within our facilities the best way we can, and I think that we can do it. I mean, I'm a, you know, solution-oriented people. I think we have solution-oriented people at the town of Aurora, both in the Bridge Club and in our staff, and I think we can make the best of the situation that we have. But the reality is, as the mayor mentioned, we've made a decision to move forward with the demolition of these buildings, repurposing the space for enhanced community space and to drive economic development to the core of our downtown. And in my opinion, we have to make or move forward with that process. So I'm in favor of the motion on the floor, and I'm in favor of staff continuing to work with the Bridge Club and the 7 other user groups to look for options within town facilities that can accommodate their use. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Tom. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's a shame that I've seen less flip-flopping at fishing tournaments than I've seen here tonight. Council unanimously decided to move forward in the demolition of these buildings. To claim now that we weren't in favor of demolishing those buildings, it's disingenuous. We need to move forward. And so I can't state enough that there are solutions to be found. It's difficult when you're staring at the problems now to see the solutions, but I have full faith that we'll be able to come to something that works for all of the tenants. And as Mr. Downey stated already, you know, there hasn't been space allocated and found for the Air Cadets to date. But we're going to keep working. We're going to keep working with all the tenants to make sure that we have something that works in the long run to the best of our ability, and I'm confident in our ability to get things done. So I look forward to voting in favor of this, and I look forward to moving forward, because we've all identified, we can't say this enough, that there is not enough community space. That's why we're undertaking this process. We're doing this to build more community space. And so to be paralyzed by the decision of a catch-22 and not make a decision because it's easier than not moving forward, that's not what we're elected to do. We're elected here to move forward. We're elected here to make decisions, and sometimes the tough decisions are the right decisions. And in the long run, this is the right decision. It will have growing pains. Nobody here says that it won't, but we need to move forward so that this situation doesn't happen for councils in the future. So I look forward to moving forward and you know, getting it done.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Kim.
You know, the reason for my proposed amendment that was defeated an hour ago to November 30th was really just to buy time. Give the membership an extra couple of months to enjoy the facility, and you know, and I do understand that, you know what, if we're not going to find, if you only have 7 square kilometers of area to look at for a solution, and you're not going to find it in the next 90 days, it probably won't be had in the next 60 days after that. For me, as human beings, sometimes it takes some time to kind of get it to our heads that, you know what, this is not possible. So my gesture was just to buy time and that they can enjoy the facilities a little bit longer, and who knows, you know, miracles do happen. With the amendment, that staff will continue to work with the membership, all the members of the groups. I'm happy to support the motion, the amended motion.
Thank you, Councillor Kim. Mayor Daw.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to make a correction. So the clause that we're referring to from the December 5th meeting, clause 4, from the motion specifically states that council authorized staff to proceed with an application for the demolition, of 52 and 56 Victoria Street, pending the relocation of the tenants. And on a recorded vote, it was actually 8-1, with Councillor Gartner voting against. So just to be perfectly clear, the rest of us voted in favor of it.
Thank you, Mayor Daw. Councillor Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just trying to add up the number of square feet that the groups are asking for. And, well, it's somewhere around 4,000. I think we have to be very careful and not mislead any groups. The Bridge Club has come out, and I thank them for that. But there's other groups here. We can't promise that when we do new community space that we are going to be able to accommodate them all. It's unrealistic and unfair to the groups, because we know that some around the council want to expand the museum. So we will do our best. We will try our best. But we may not succeed. So we just cannot make promises that we may not be able to keep.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. And I agree with a lot of the comments around the table, that the fact that this is whatever we try to come up with is a temporary solution. By all means, I don't think that there's anything out there that would be a long-term permanent solution. And so that's what we're looking at. And so I think at the end of the day, there has to be a compromise, excuse me, there has to be a give and take from all sides. And I think that whether that means less square footage, there might be smaller space, there might be, the time frame, you might have to move from one facility to another. We're going to have to come up with those creative solutions. And I agree with Councillor Perry that I think that staff will be able to come up with something by October 1st, hopefully, that will be creative, that the Bridge Club and some of the other tenants, knowing the predicament that we're in, that there is no space, that they'll be able to agree that for that temporary solution, it's the best thing for this time and moving forward until we can find that permanent solution for everyone. And hopefully we can down the road. So with that being said, I'll call the vote. Motion on the floor as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries.